Hey, what's going on, everybody? So today we're going to be doing an interactive read aloud based on the book Who Was Milton Hershey? Now, judging by the last name and the picture on the cover, how many of you think you already know who this guy is? Does his name sound familiar to anybody else? Probably. Alright, so we're going to be learning about the life of Milton Hershey. We're going to start here, Chapter 1. Time to get to work. If you love chocolate, then you should celebrate every September 13th. On that day in 1857, Milton Snavely Hershey was born in the house in Hockersville, Pennsylvania. It was a town in the lovely Lebanon Valley. Milton would later become world famous for making chocolate, but he spent almost all his life not far from the house in which he was born. Milton's parents were Henry and Fanny Hershey. Henry was a dreamer. He loved reading and trying new things. Henry was always looking for the next big idea, even if he didn't know what it was. By 1860, Henry's farm had failed. Henry moved his small family to Titusville, Pennsylvania. Oil had been discovered there, and he wanted to make a fortune by pumping oil. Henry also tried selling supplies to the prospectors pouring in the area. Neither idea worked. Within a year and a half, Fanny's family had to pay to bring the Hershey family back home. They tried farming again. Milton loved it, feeding the chickens and picking berries. To help out, he sometimes sold berries to their neighbors. Here are his parents. His family didn't have much money, so every bit helped. Milton was always careful with whatever money he got. In 1863, a Civil War battle was fought at nearby Gettysburg. Milton took his coins and buried them in a can in the garden for safekeeping. Then later, he couldn't find the can. So, have any of you ever hid something, either around your house or in your backyard or wherever, and then you weren't able to find it again either? So what was it? So, along with his new baby sister, Serena, Milton and his parents moved again later in 1863. Fanny's family helped the Hersheys buy a farm called 9 Points. In this new place, Milton was sent to yet another new school. He was not a good student and didn't like school that much. He had already been in several by the time he was 9. At 9 Points, Henry Hershey tried farming again, and failed again. Though Fanny sold eggs and Milton helped out, life was hard for the Hersheys. In 1867, Serena, Milton's sister, became very ill. She was just shy of her 5th birthday when she died of scarlet fever. That was the final straw for Fanny. Though she didn't directly blame Henry, she turned her back on him. They could not get a divorce. Her religion didn't allow it. They did split up, however, which was very unusual in those days. Milton stayed with his mother. In 1870, Milton's school days ended. He was 12, but he could only read and write as well as a 4th grader. Fanny had no problem with that. She said that it was time for Milton to get a real job. Yep. 4th grader, yep. Chapter 2, The Young Candy Maker. Milton's first job did not work out. He was working for a printer. It was difficult and boring. One day, he took matters into his own hands. He let his straw hat drop into one of the printing machines while it was running. The machine stopped working, and a few minutes later, so did Milton. Fanny suggested that a job at an ice cream parlor would be more fun. So Milton started working at the Royer's Ice Cream Parlor and Garden in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. It was much more fun than printing. Lancaster was a bigger city, too, with many more people and things to see. Milton had learned from his mother how to work hard, so he put in long hours mixing, stirring, wrapping, and selling Royer's products, such as ice cream, juices, and candy. From his father, however, Milton got a love of trying new things. At Royer's, he saw how the owner mixed different kinds of ingredients together to try new candies. Milton wanted to make his own candies, so he started experimenting with his own ideas. Royers was located in a busy part of the city. College students came by to buy ice cream and sweets. Businessmen came during lunch. You can see it's pretty packed in there. Milton often kept an eye on the horses of customers while they shopped. One customer liked Milton so much that he always tossed the boy a dime in thanks. After Milton had worked at Royers for 4 years, Fanny encouraged him to move onward and upward. She hoped that her son would be more than just a shop assistant. In 1876, Milton took his first big steps into business. Although only 19, Milton opened his own candy shop in Philadelphia, about 75 miles away. The big city was booming. It was 1876, America was celebrating its 100th birthday, and thousands of people were joining the party. Hershey borrowed money from his Aunt Mattie. Milton's shop on Spring Garden Street was a hit from the start. He really knew how to bring people in. He ran a pipe up from the basement, where he cooked the candy, to the ground floor. People smelled the boiling sugar and came to satisfy their sweet tooth. Hershey's shop sold candy that he made himself, along with fruit and ice cream. He didn't sell chocolate, however. At the time, chocolate was a luxury item. It was expensive to make. It also melted very quickly and couldn't be sold in warm weather. In fact, many people in America had never tasted chocolate. For the moment, the name Hershey meant taffy and sugar candy. Sales were good at first. Milton could make great candy, but he was not a great businessman. The store did not make a profit. Perhaps more schooling might have helped Milton, but it was far too late for that. He worked so hard that early in 1881 he got sick. He had to spend a month in bed getting better. In early 1882, Milton Hershey had to close his candy shop. Wagons from Lancaster arrived in Philadelphia. Milton's cousins were on board. They filled the wagons with gear and kettles from the shop. Hershey turned his back on Philadelphia and headed home. To his mother's surprise, Milton's next move was to follow his father. Henry had written to say that he was in Colorado mining for gold and that Milton should join him. It was a move that would change all of their lives. Milton arrived in Colorado as the gold was running out. Once again, Henry had missed his dream, but Milton stayed and tried to make the best of it. He got a job at a candy company. The store sold a sweet treat called caramel. Milton had never seen caramel before. Had seen caramel before, but never like this. It was soft and creamy and didn't get stale on the shelf. He learned that the secret was to mix fresh milk, not the wax that other caramel makers used. Milton memorized everything about making the perfect caramel. Then he decided to open his own shop again. By 1883, he had traveled back across the country to New York, the biggest city in the United States. At first, he worked at a fancy shop called Hewler's. In his free time, he explored the city, looking for a place to open his own shop. In this period, New York City's candy shops sold to their own neighborhoods. If you wanted candy, you went to your local store. Candy was not sold in nearly as many places as it is today. So Milton needed a neighborhood without a candy store. He decided that 6th Avenue near 42nd Street was the right place. Today, surrounded by skyscrapers, it is one of the busiest corners in the city. In 1884, it was not nearly so busy. There was a park across the street and small buildings. But Milton's shop did pretty well for a while. People going to a nearby theater often stopped in. A new hotel brought in more customers. Fanny and Aunt Mattie once again came to help, mostly with wrapping the treats Milton cooked up from the basement. When people came to the store, Milton helped them choose candy. In those days, candy store clerks helped with every purchase. There were no counters filled with pre-wrapped candy. Instead, the candy was kept in glass cases or glass jars behind the counter. Often customers would buy several pieces of candy for just a penny. They would point to their favorites from the clerk, and the clerk would count them out and carefully wrap them in paper. So have any of you seen candy only sold for just a few cents? Did your grandparents ever tell you stories of when they were kids and how inexpensive candy was back then? How much was it? Yeah, pretty cheap, right? Unfortunately, Milton had to close the store in 1886. His father, Henry, was partially to blame. The year before, Henry had arrived in New York City and wanted his son to try to make cough drops. But the special machines needed to form the drops were very expensive, and the cough drop adventure ended up costing Milton his business. The store was ruined, and Milton headed home to Pennsylvania. But Milton still had something valuable. He still knew how to make amazing caramels. He was not ready to give up on the candy business. Along with his secret caramel recipe, Milton had learned something else in his travels. Selling caramels at one at a time was nice, but selling them in big batches was better. With one sale to a hotel or restaurant, he could make as much as selling to several dozen individual customers. He borrowed money from a bank to start a small caramel factory in Lancaster. Milton was soon selling his tasty caramels. Then something amazing happened. Milton got the big break he had been waiting for. A man in England was visiting Lancaster. He tried one of Milton's caramels and loved it. He placed a huge order that had to be delivered to England in 3 months. With such a big order, Milton paid off a bank loan and bought more equipment and ingredients. So Hershey's factory made the order and sent the caramels across the Atlantic Ocean. Milton Hershey was finally a success. The Lancaster Caramel Company boomed. Milton kept experimenting. The caramels got even better. He called it Crystal A Caramel. He sold huge amounts to stores, restaurants, delis, and more. Having his factory in Lancaster taught Henry a few things about location. First, cows on Lancaster farms provided all the milk that he needed to make caramel. Also, Lancaster itself was near one of the new electrical plants, so his factory's machines had plenty of power. Railroads connected his factory to the places where the sugar and flavoring came from to make the candy, and to the cities where the candy orders were sent. He also relied on the hard-working people who lived in the area. Lancaster was a great place for his caramel company. And Milton Hershey loved making candy. Milton spent hours trying new ways to make caramels. He tried putting nuts in some brands. He tried icing. He even made some caramels that were less expensive so more folks could afford them. Milton just didn't just play the role of boss either. He rolled up his sleeves and mixed caramels in huge vats too. He wanted to make sure his caramels were the best they could be. By the early 1890s, the company had 2 factories and more than 1,300 workers. Thanks to caramel and hard work, Milton Hershey was soon one of the richest men in Lancaster. He bought a big house for himself and another one for his mother. He also made his first trips to Europe. While in England, he saw that some candy companies were starting to sell chocolate. They were inventing new ways to make chocolate so they could be easily sold and stored. That got Milton thinking. After 4, Milton goes to Chicago. In 1893, another trip changed Milton's life. That year, he went to Chicago for the World Columbian Exposition. It was held to celebrate the 400 years since Christopher Columbus had arrived in the New World. For the fair, dozens of new buildings were put up in the Chicago Park. All were made from wood and white stucco. The fair was nicknamed the White City. There were exhibits from around the world. People could ride boats on man-made lakes. They tasted new treats, including something called a hamburger. Visitors rode the world's first Ferris wheel, as you can see in the picture right there. In one building with food exhibits, Milton saw something that made him stop in his tracks. A German candy company had made a temple out of chocolate. It's 38 feet tall, about as tall as a 4-story building. Hershey was stunned, and in the building with machinery exhibits, there were iron machines clanking and puffing away. The machines were making chocolate. The J.M. Lemon Company from Germany had set up a complete chocolate-making factory right there in the White City. A machine roasted the raw cacao beans. Another machine ground the roasted beans into powder. Into the powder went sugar and flavoring. Hershey watched the machines for hours. He asked endless questions. He returned again and again, even bringing friends and people from his company to see the machine. His cousin, Frank Snabley, said that Milton told him, "The caramel business is a fad, but chocolate is something we will always have." Hershey was so convinced of this that he bought every piece of gear that Lemon had in Chicago. He even ordered more machines from Germany. He took everything back to Lancaster, where Milton set up the new Hershey Chocolate Company in a corner of his caramel factory. As he had with caramels, Milton experimented. The chocolate made by the new German machines was good, but it wasn't perfect. It was still a little bit bitter. Milton wanted to make milk chocolate, as Nestle had done. Milk chocolate was sweeter and lasted longer than the chocolate available at the time. It could be molded into shapes. It would not melt as quickly as regular chocolate. One big problem, Nestle wouldn't share the secret. Milton returned to his family's first home, which he used as a lab to work out new chocolate formula. He mixed and poured and sampled and cooked. He tried again and again, and finally he got pretty close. Hershey came up with a recipe for a type of milk chocolate. With that recipe in hand, he made a big decision. Milton Hershey decided to sell his caramel company and devote all his energy to chocolate. It was a huge risk, but Hershey was confident that chocolate was the future. Chapter 5. Milton Hershey didn't spend all his time working. In 1897, he met Catherine Sweeney, who was nicknamed Kitty, at a candy shop in upstate New York, where he traveled to sell caramel. She and Milton began seeing a lot of each other. She later moved to New York City, and he visited her there often. Hershey didn't tell anybody back home about Kitty until after they were married in May of 1898. His family and the candy company workers were very surprised when he first brought her home. Hershey was 41 at the time, a successful and serious businessman. Kitty was only 26 and enjoyed shopping, entertaining, and having fun. Together, they would make a terrific team. In 1900, with his chocolate dream in mind, Hershey sold the Lancaster Caramel Company for $1 million. A new century was starting, and America was about to get its first candy bar. After the sale, Milton took Kitty to Europe. They visited many countries in Europe, including France, Germany, and Austria. They also traveled to Egypt, where they rode camels near the famous pyramids. Milton also made sure to try many types of candy. He was always looking for new ideas for his company. Milton loved spending time with Kitty away from the factory. With her, he could relax and not be the boss. Milton liked to gamble and play cards. Unlike other very wealthy businessmen, he didn't spend much money on himself, but he loved to buy Kitty jewels and furs. Sadly, he also had to spend money on many doctors. Though Kitty seemed healthy, she had a disease that often weakened her muscles. Milton did his best to help her. He took her to doctor after doctor, trying to find a cure. No one could stop the disease. But they did try to make her feel better for a while. Kitty's illness meant she could not have children, and that was a terrible disappointment. But Milton and Kitty found a way to have many children be part of their lives. Even before he had the perfect formula for milk chocolate, Milton took another big risk. He bought 1,200 acres in nearby Derry Church. Hershey wanted to build a huge chocolate factory and a town for all its workers. He planned everything from the start so that it would all be perfect. Before the Hershey factory made one chocolate bar, Milton had laid out the streets and parks of his town. He hired architects to design the homes and buildings. He included a bank, a zoo, and the schools. Hershey even set up a trolley car line to help workers get around town and travel to and from the factory. Then he built the huge factory. Its giant smokestacks had his name in big letters. So does this sound like a typical chocolate factory to everybody? Discuss with a partner why you think so. Hershey tried something else new. He made chocolate on an assembly line. Assembly line is a way to make a product by adding one thing at a time as the product moves along a work line. Instead of one worker making a product by himself, the steps are divided up among many workers. Each is in charge of one step, which the worker does over and over. Products could be made faster and in greater numbers this way. In Detroit, Henry Ford had used the assembly line to make cars. The plant soon sent the smell of chocolate floating all over the valley. As the workers moved into the town, they enjoyed the smell too. Though the town did not have an official name yet, people were already calling it the sweetest place on earth. While his dream town and factory grew, Hershey kept experimenting with chocolate. Finally, by early 1904, he was satisfied. He had a way to make milk chocolate that could be shipped safely. It was sweet, creamy, and could be molded into bars. It would last for several days without being kept cold. All of America, not just Pennsylvania, was about to get its first real taste of milk chocolate. Each bar was wrapped in dark maroon paper with large gold letters that said Hershey. Each bar cost just 5 cents. By 1905, the factory was making as much as 100,000 pounds of chocolate a day. Chapter 6. Milton Hershey had made great chocolate, but he also made a great town. The idea of building a whole town for the company's workers was not new. Some coal miners had done the same thing in the late 1800s. The Pullman Company, which made the railroad cars, had a company town in Illinois. But these towns were not nearly as nice as Hershey, Pennsylvania. In other company towns, the houses were not very well made. The workers had to buy all their food at the company store, too, where prices were often high. There was nothing to do for fun in those towns either. In Hershey's town, he included parks and theaters. Hershey's houses were comfortable and attractive. They had electricity and indoor plumbing. At the time, many American homes still didn't have flush toilets. As the years went on, Hershey kept adding to the town. In 1904, he built a library and a post office. In 1905, he built a bank so that workers could save their money. Also in 1905, a zoo was added. The Hershey Park Zoo caused some problems, though. The monkeys were very good at escaping. But townspeople just called the zoo when they saw them scampering on their lawns. So, do you think that Hershey's treatment of his employees helped his business? Why or why not? Why do you guys think so? In 1907, he opened a huge park for all the residents. In 1910, he opened a general store so that they could shop close to home. Over the years, he gave money to different religious groups so they could build churches in the town, too. Milton shows all his street names in his town. Many had something to do with chocolate. You might live on a street named for Java or Ceylon, places where cacao beans were grown. Reba Avenue was named for a type of cacao bean. The town's main intersection was Chocolate Avenue and Cocoa Avenue. Hershey was different from many very rich men of his time. He felt strongly that anyone who had plenty of money ought to share it. Though he never followed a particular religion, he said he followed the golden rule. He wanted to do for other people what they hoped they would do for him. His workers made the chocolate that made him rich, so he wanted to make sure they shared in his success. In fact, he gave them a bonus each year from the company's profits. Hershey brought chocolate to America, but his idea of how a business owner should conduct himself was probably more important. The town really needed a name. In 1904, the U.S. Post Office said it needed to know where the mail should be sent. A contest was held to pick a name. Among the finalists were Beansdale, Majestic, St. Milton's, and Zenith. The winner was Hershey Cocoa, but the post office turned that one down. It sounded like a product, not a town. Finally, the choice was obvious. In 1906, the new town was officially named Hershey, Pennsylvania. Chapter 7. A few years after opening the Hershey factory sold more than $5 million worth of bars every year. Today, that would be about $123 million. Milton didn't think he needed to branch out to different chocolate products. He was happy making chocolate in the classic chocolate bar shape. But in 1907, he created one new product that would become even more famous than the Hershey chocolate bar. Hershey had a small machine that dropped small amounts of chocolate on a conveyor belt. The candies were first called Sweethearts. The story goes that when each drop hit the conveyor belt, it made a small smacking sound. Milton heard the sound and came up with a new, better name. The Hershey Kiss was born. Soon millions of the kisses were being hand-wrapped in the factory. Workers put a small tissue label on the candy. Then they spun it all inside a small piece of foil. Until 1921, every kiss was wrapped in by hand. Hershey's mother, Fanny, who lived in a big house near the factory, still wanted to help. She had a box of unwrapped Hershey Kisses sent to her every day. She wrapped them and gave them to visitors. Visitors to Hershey, Pennsylvania today see that some of the town street lights are in the shape of kisses. It was important to Milton that his chocolate was affordable. He wanted everyone to enjoy chocolate. For 60 years, until 1969, Hershey bars only cost 5 cents. And you could find them everywhere. It used to be that a candy store was the only place to buy candy. But Milton told his salesmen to go everywhere. Drugstores, grocery stores, lunch counters, gift stores, anywhere people might want to buy chocolate bars. Milton and Kitty Hershey were very rich. They had built themselves a beautiful house and gardens on a hill overlooking the factory. They were beloved by the people of the town, for whom they had done so much. The couple always missed not having children for their own, so Hershey came up with a way to care for and raise many kids. In 1909, Milton started the Hershey Industrial School for orphan boys. In the early 1900s, there was a great concern for what to do for orphan boys. There were orphan girls too, of course, but in those days, girls could get jobs that didn't require much training. They became cooks or seamstresses or housekeepers. Boys, it was thought, needed more schooling to prepare them for jobs in factories or in stores. The difference in the way boys and girls were treated was not fair, but that's how it was. Hershey's school was meant to give orphan boys the skills they needed to earn a decent living. The school also gave them a home. Hershey himself had bounced from school to school. He wanted to make sure that other boys avoided that. At the school, boys lived in family homes with foster parents. Other schools for orphan boys had big dorms where everyone slept in one room. Hershey didn't want that. He wanted the boys to feel comfortable and loved. The school accepted orphans from nearby countries. Some poor families that had several kids could also send their boys to the school to live and study. All the boys studied reading and basic math. They learned trades such as carpentry and farming. They also worked on the school's farm, milking the cows every morning. Because Milton Hershey also believed in having fun, Hershey Park grew and grew. He added a carousel, bowling alleys, and a miniature railroad. There were concerts and shows, and, in winter, ice skating. Most of those things were free to the citizens of Hershey, Pennsylvania. Thousands of visitors came too. At the end of 1913, more than 100,000 people had visited Hershey Park. As all these things were going on in the town of Hershey, Milton and Kitty continued to travel wherever her health allowed. In 1912, they made another trip to Europe. Milton had bought tickets on a famous ocean liner for their voyage home. However, because of a business meeting, he had to change plans to take an earlier ship. That turned out to be an incredible stroke of luck for the Hersheys. The original ship that they were set to sail on was the Titanic, which was called the most luxurious ship ever made. The massive ocean liner hit an iceberg and sank on its way to America. Luck was with them on that trip, but it ran out for Kitty not long after. She was visiting friends in Philadelphia when she became very ill. Milton rushed to her side. After years of poor health, Kitty died on March 25, 1915. Milton never married again, and he kept pictures of Kitty in every room of his house for the rest of his life. Twice a week, he had fresh flowers put on the grave of his beloved Kitty. Chapter 8. Milton missed Kitty terribly. In her memory, he did something truly remarkable, and he did it in secret. In 1918, not long after Kitty died, Milton gave all his stock in the Hershey Chocolate Company to the school. Since 1951, it had been called the Milton Hershey School. He also made a gift without telling anyone at his company. It was not until 5 years later that anyone outside the school knew about it. The news leaked when a newspaper revealed the gift. Milton did this to make sure the school would keep going long after he was gone. Today, the school still owns stock worth more than $9 billion. The Hershey School is richer than most universities in America. In fact, the school is so wealthy that in 1963 it could afford to build a hospital. The Penn State Hershey Medical Center is in Hershey and is one of the biggest in the state. The only rule Milton made about his gift was that it had to be used to help the students and the school. He watched over the school for the rest of his life. He treated the boys like his sons. He would often visit them in their homes with their foster parents. They also came to visit Milton and at his house to have tea. Once a year, he invited the whole school for a breakfast. Starting in 1930, the school has had a homecoming picnic for former students every year. For their part, the students loved Mr. Hershey. Much of the sugar needed to make Hershey chocolate came from the island nation of Cuba. After Kitty's death, Milton visited and fell in love with the tropical country. His mother, Fanny, had died in 1920, so Milton had less reason to stay in Hershey. So in the 1920s and 30s, he spent as much as half his time in Cuba. He bought up several sugarcane farms. He built a factory to process the sugarcane into sugar for his chocolate. Then he built new houses for the workers on his farm. He also made sure the houses had electricity, which was very rare in Cuba at the time. He used the same generosity and creativity in Cuba that he had in Pennsylvania. In the 1930s, America and the rest of the world went into an economic depression. Millions of people lost their jobs. Millions lost their homes. It was terrible. It was a terrible time for many in America. But it was not so bad in Hershey, Pennsylvania. Milton made sure that everyone in his factories kept working. If they weren't making chocolate, he found them jobs elsewhere. He put up several new buildings in town. Then he built a huge sport arena for the ice hockey team. The deluxe Hotel Hershey was complete. A massive new community building went up too. Today, it is part of the company headquarters. Since his chocolate bars were still only a nickel, people could afford to keep buying them. The factory stayed open, and Hershey, the company and the town, survived the Depression. Chapter 9. Chocolate Fortune Lives On. 1937, Milton Hershey turned 80 years old. The town of Hershey gave him a big birthday party. They sang him a song and had huge cake in the sports arena. For his part, Milton was slowing down. He let his managers take over, running much of his company. By 1940, sales of Hershey products were $44 million, the highest they'd ever been. In only 4 years, sales had almost doubled to more than $80 million. Meanwhile, Milton still liked experimenting. He tried making gum and chocolate pie. He tried making candy with raisins and molasses. He even tried baking new kinds of muffins. Making soap was one of his odder experiments. He ended up making way too much, and it wasn't very good. He even tried to sell some himself from a shop in Atlantic City, New Jersey. He also tried to make ice cream less expensive by making it without milk, and chocolate with flavors such as celery, turnip, or beets. Ew. So even in his old age, Hershey still continued experimenting. Why do you think he did so instead of just retiring? Few of these ideas ever really worked. In 1930, Milton gave his own house, called High Point, to the town. It became the clubhouse for the golf club. In 1941, he hired Ben Hogan to work at the golf course. Hogan would go on to become one of the greatest golfers in the world. With more free time, Milton loved driving around Hershey. He visited the factory buildings and the school. At the community building, he sometimes sat underneath a large painting of himself. He hid behind a newspaper to hear what people said about him. In September 1945, he celebrated his 88th birthday. A few friends threw him a party at his old family home. It was where he had been born and where he later created his famous milk chocolate. A few days later, he started having trouble breathing. Milton Hershey died of pneumonia on October 13, 1945. The Hershey Chocolate Company has continued, of course. In the decades since Milton's death, the company had added new candies, such as Reese's Peanut Butter Cups and Nutrageous Bar. The company had also bought other candy brands, such as Twizzlers Licorice and Icebreaker Mints. It's truly a candy empire. And this empire was created by one man, Milton Hershey. Alright, so, what did everybody think? What do you think of Milton Hershey? Were you surprised at some of the events that his life took? Were you surprised that he only had really a 4th grade education? Yeah, it would be kind of weird, don't you think? You think that would really work out well today? No, probably not, no. So what this book teaches an important lesson about experimenting and never giving up. So if Milton had given up when his first company when his first candy shop had gone under, do you think we would have had Hershey as we know it today? No, probably not, right? Alright, so that is all, guys. So I really hope you guys enjoyed the book and the lessons that it taught you guys.